start with the Thursday lecture, right? And today we'll continue to talk about evolution. Really quickly recap from what we covered last time. We discussed one of the crucial points, a cornerstone in biology, which is known as a biological evolution. It's a theory, yes, but it has some evidence. And today I will present some of the parts of the evidence to that particular process. And we already discussed that evolution means unfolding, from a Latin word, which means unfolding. And it's basically how the life unfolds itself on that particular planet. The question is, does the evolution talking about the origin of life on this particular planet or anywhere in the universe, if you believe that there is aliens or anything like that? Speaking of which, do you believe in aliens? Well, if you don't, that's not really a good idea, because right now you're looking at one. According to United States government, I am a legal alien. Yeah, I have the alien card and all that stuff. Yes. I'm not a citizen of United States, therefore I'm legal alien. Here we go. So anyway, so in this particular case, biological evolution, how the life was unfolding. Yet it does not say how it was started, how it was created, if you wish, whatever it is. And there is quite a few theories about that. But once again, it's a theory. Actually, most of the time, it's a hypothesis. So, but going back to the biological evolution, please know that particular definition. Let me get the laser pointer so I can. That particular definition right here, biological evolution, is the process of changing of genetic frequencies in the population or within the population from generation to generation. We did the lab where you could see that the the frequencies of a particular for a particular allele, the presence or absence of fur in the bunny population was changing due to natural selection, right? So biological evolution, and again, I will ask that particular question over and over again on the test, on the lab practicals, etc. So please, like, put the highlighted or put the star next to it. Know that particular definition. Biological evolution is the process of changing of genetic frequencies from population to from generation to generation. Short, concise, direct to the point. Because periodically I'm getting the answers, biological evolution is when something biological evolving. That's not a definition. Please don't avoid those particular things. All right, so microevolution, we already talked about. That's on the scale of the population. As soon as we start talking about new subspecies, species, genus, families, new kingdoms, we are talking about macroevolution. It's a large scale, species and up. And today, not today, next time, we'll talk about the phylogeny, kingdoms, phylum, and so on and so forth. You probably covered that in one of your biology in either junior high or high school. So generally, and evolution, and this is what makes many of the people not very happy with that, because of the common ancestor. Basically, what the evolution is saying, that life started on Earth somehow. We don't know. The evolution is not talking about how it started. And then whenever the organisms were reproducing, remember, reproduction is a key part to that, and they were accumulating different changes, they started becoming a different organisms. Yet they still had the same or shared the common ancestor, like us and the chimpanzees. And this is where the human evolution comes in. Please, I beg you, do not ever tell me or anybody that we evolved from chimpanzees, gorillas, or orangutans. No, it didn't happen. Please, I don't know how the people got that particular idea. Maybe to watching too much of the planet of apes or ape planet, whatever. But we did not evolve from chimpanzees. I know it's a shocking. Yeah, we did not evolve from chimpanzees. No, we did not. No, no, not at all. Chimpanzees had their own evolutionary history. We had our own evolutionary history. We'll talk about that today in the lab as well. Yet, at some point of time, we shared a common ancestor. Was it a chimpanzee? No, it was not a chimpanzee. Was it a human? No, it was not a human. It was a hominid, a human-like creature. And some of those particular populations stayed in a tropical forest and eventually evolved through millions, literally millions of years into what known as the modern chimpanzees. The other one stayed kind of on the grassy savanna lands, plains, and they evolved into something which we know now as the human beings, Homo sapiens. We did not directly came from chimpanzees or gorillas or orangutans or any other monkeys which are currently nowadays. We did not evolve from a rhesus monkey, which you can see throughout Asia and some of them in Africa. No, we did not. We had a common ancestor millions of years ago, but that's pretty much it. So now, because of that particular common ancestor, we see that particular branching out, 3 major branches. 2 lectures from now, we'll talk about 2 of those branches, something which is known as the prokaryotic organisms, bacteria and archaea, even though they're both prokaryotic, archaea kind of more closely related to the eukarya rather than the bacteria itself. And then we will spend majority of our semester time talking about eukaryotes, right? And we'll discuss that a little bit later. Now, this particular picture, you will actually see it in in the cladogram assignment, exactly the same picture. What does it tell you? That all of those creatures right here, vertebrates, see, vertebrates, share a specific trait, meaning that they started from the same ancestor. And then there was evolution, unfolding of life, adapting to the different environment, dying off due to mass extinction and so on. So at some point of time, that particular common ancestor right here, which was a fish-like creature, split into 2 different branches. One of them, and it's not entirely correct, but simplified speaking, 2 branches, skeleton made out of cartilage, and created modern cartilage fish, such as shark and stingrays and all that. And another come up with a different strategy in life. Instead of having cartilage for the bone, they step up and they calcify, creating the bony skeleton. Make sense? Now, this one is known as the derivative trait because it splits into a cartilage and non-cartilage bone. Now, all of those creatures above that particular trait will have a bony skeleton. Next derivative trait, we have fish, and then at some point of time, fish decide to conquer the dry land. And we'll talk about that later on in unit 3, how we think it happened. So it started climbing up and it's ended up with the 4 limbs. So now we have one group, Rayfian fishes, do not have 4 limbs. Everybody else will have, that's a terrestrial creatures, more or less, and they have 4 limbs. Amphibians, mammals, reptiles, and birds. Birds quite often put in the same category as the reptiles, because reptiles, as you might or might not know, is the polyphyletic group. We're supposed to split it up. We're just historically calling them reptiles and the birds, even though we're supposed to split it into several different groups. And then, whenever they were conquering the dry land, specifically dry land, not just the tropical forest, but the dry land, the creatures come up with amniotic egg. to protect the embryo from what? From drying out. It's a dry land. So they had the option, and all of those creatures will have the amniotic egg. And then they ended up with hair, or they ended up with other things. So all of those are derivative traits, but once again, we can trace it down and we can propose how our long-time ancestor will look like. Right here, probably like a fish. Right here, more like a bony fish. Right here, some sort of amphibian. Right here, some sort of reptile. Yes, at some point of time, mammals were very similar looking as the reptiles, the pro-mammals, before the initial ones. And then we split up, and as you might know, that there is some mammals, there is like 3 species of mammals, which still lay eggs, right? The platypus, and 2 echidnas, which is kind of like a porcupine-looking creature. It's not porcupine, by no means. So anyway, here we have exactly the same thing, just representation with different groups. Bacteria, archaea, most of them protists, and then we have, of course, the 3 major kingdoms, the plants, the fungi, and the animals. Now, evidence. Do we have the evidence for the process? Why it's a theory, why it's not a hypothesis? Initially, it was a hypothesis. Now it's a theory because it has some very solid evidence behind. Why it's not a law, and we'll talk about that momentarily. But let's go into the evidence. First of all, comparative anatomy. Comparative anatomy is basically, and this is where we'll talk about homologous, analogous, as well as the vestigial structures, which basically indicates that, let's say, start with vestigial structures. Vestigial structures, what are they? They are usually reduced in size structures which a current organism no longer using, but at some point of time back, the ancestors were actively dependent on it. Like what? Well, you might heard about the appendix, right? We have a tiny little bitty appendix. It's a part of our large intestine, and we do not use it for intended purposes. It's part of the digestive system, but we're not using it for the digestion no more. At our part, as a human beings, as a Homo sapiens. Why? Because at some point of time, a few millions of years ago, we drastically switched our diet. Our diet was predominantly, well, our ancestor diet, or let's say great apes diet, is predominantly vegetarian, almost vegan. Of course, if they catch a lizard, they'll eat the lizard, but predominantly vegetarian. Vegetarian food or plant food is very tough. Needs to be chewed a lot, needs to be processed a lot. As a result, appendix were playing a very important long-term function of the digestion of cellulose. There was hosting some bacteria which helped, and so on and so forth. We switched our diet from the predominantly vegetarians. We went into omnivore mode, eating both plants and animals, and we did one more very important thing. We start cooking the food. As a result, our digestive system don't have to work as hard as the let's say digestive system of the great apes nowadays. We are preparing the food. We are cooking it to ease up the digestion, at least partly. All right. Okay, no questions so far. All right, now homologous and analogous structures. Homo means same, right? So homologous, it's the same structures. However, and here you're looking at the homologous structure of the front limb. In humans, we have 1 bone, 2 bones, bunch of bones, 5 phalanges, right? In a dog, exactly the same bones. In a bird, same bones, slightly different because of the flight, the metacarpals as well as the phalanges are fusing up. In a whale, so here look at the mammals, same type of the bones. Now, whale, of course, it's a flipper, so they will have extended phalanges and much shorter those particular bones. The radius, the ulna, the humerus, right? Humerus, radius, ulna, yeah. So in this particular case, structural similarity. Why they are structurally similar? Why do we have the same number of bones, even though dog has a very different, kind of different function of their front limbs than ours? Because we had a common ancestor. The comparative anatomy. You're comparing the anatomy and you are finding that closer related creatures will have closer anatomy, or similar, more similar anatomy. Now, analogous structures. A wing of the bird versus wing of the bat. Means they look the same, they even call the same a wing or a wing of the insect. They're called wings, but they come up or they evolve differently from each other, independently. Those particular bones we inherited as from our ancestors. So homologous structures, inherited ones, same one. Another, well, there is quite a few homologous structures. We'll talk about that. Analogous structures not inherited by, evolved by that particular group, and it might start looking very similar to the other. Wing of the bat and wing of the bird will look kind of similar. Flipper of the whale versus flipper of the fish looks very similar. Why? Because they're doing the same functions. Another very interesting vestigial structure, if you touch a very, very tip of the ear, right here, right there, tiny little bitty bumps, cartilage bumps right here on the top of my ear. Most of you will have those tiny little bitty bumps of cartilage as well. That's a vestigial structure of what? Of the gill slits, embryonic gill slits. Gill slits play extremely important role in the development of our head, and whatever is not developed will end up as those tiny little bitty cartilage bumps. Why? Because our long-time ancestor, about 200, 250 millions of years ago, had, guess what? Gills, a fish of some sort. Now, yeah, we will not be able to grow the gills out of those tiny little bitty bumps. We had our way of evolving, changing the jaw. That's a part of the gills. Used to be a gill arches. We'll talk about that, or embryonic arches. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we'll discuss the mammals or evolution of mammals, evolution of vertebrates, I should say. Now, next one, embryology. Embryology, think about it. First 30 minutes of your life, about, give or take. First 30 minutes. The egg has been fertilized by the sperm. An organism, me, you, everybody. For the very first 30 minutes of your life, you were a single cell organism. And then that particular fertilized egg, the zygote, split into a 2, 4, 16, 32, 64, and so on and so forth. Morula, blastula, gastrula, embryogenesis. But in this particular case, you can take a look that those particular creatures, the embryos from different groups, looks fairly similar. All of them will have limbs, 4 limbs. All of them will have a tail, including humans. All of them will have a gill arches, because essentially ontogeny, the individual embryonic development, kind of hits the steps of the ancient ancestors. We started with 1 cell, then we become ball of cells, known as a blastula. We'll talk about that, and so on and so forth. So anybody knows where, if you're not going over the slides, anybody can tell me which one is human being? I think I have the, yeah, see, right there, the turtle. Can you tell it right away? Oh yeah, it's a turtle. No, they look very similar. Now we have a mouse. I think middle one is a human, yeah. Human being. Can you say that this is a human being? Can you? And you can actually see those particular gill slits. And the tail. Do we have a tail? No. Tail bone, tiny little bitty tail, is the vestigial structure. We don't use it. We have a tiny little bitty one. Why? Because there is no longer function at the moment. Ancestors at some point of time were swinging from the tails, yes, presumably. And then of course we have a chicken and we have a pig. Really interesting, pig and the human physiologically, both of them omnivores, eat pretty much plant and animal food at the same time. Therefore, physiologically, we are quite close to those particular creatures, and we'll talk about later on about parasitology. Many of the parasites of the pig can go in human, especially the internal one. They don't make a difference between pig/human. As a result, in many cultures, pig considered to be a dirty animal. Why dirty? Because some of the diseases can be transferred to humans without, or parasites specifically, can be transferred to the humans without much of the problem. Now, fossil records. If you'll dig out some of the fossils, let's say from 4 or so millions of years ago, would you be able to find humans there? No. You will be able to find a skull which kind of look like humans, but not humans yet. Much smaller creatures, Australopithecus, and today we'll talk about that. Then it's evolving into a habilis, and then we can see that between this and this, there is some sort of connection. That skull is similar looking. Then we're looking at the ergaster or erectus. So those ones start looking similar, but that one start increasing some of the features changes. So we have that particular links between the different shapes. However, well, initially there was the picture right here. I think it was ergaster, but I took it out. There is always some sort of missing links. We're not sure, we're not 100% sure that it was a linear movement from this guy to this guy to this guy to that guy to that guy. Actually, this guy probably gives us 2 of those. This is Neanderthalensis, this is the Homo sapiens. Homo neanderthalensis, Neanderthals, this is the sapiens. And there is probably was another one known as the Denisovians, right? So why we don't know exactly how the fossil record was going on? Because fossils are relatively hard to find and very hard to make in nature. There was a certain rules have to be applied in order for that particular skull to get fossilized. And as you can see in this particular case, most of them, it's not the full skulls. The dark areas, actually the skulls which has been found, the rest of the white part are restored. We kind of figuring it out using the biomechanics or how that particular skull is supposed to be looking. And based on the skull features, we can recreate how the creature will look like. All right. Another one, molecular genetics. With the discovery of DNA, figuring it out what it is and biochemical similarities, we can say that more closer DNA related or more closer organism related, more similar the DNA and other chemicals within the organism, such as proteins, will be. That kind of makes sense. Common genetic code. This is one of the very important things which actually point out that at some point of time we started as the single, well, we're sharing the common ancestor. Because you're taking the DNA of bacteria, you're taking a DNA of human beings, it's different DNA, but the idea of genetic code is exactly the same. As a matter of fact, nowadays, you probably heard about the genetically modified organisms. You probably heard about some of the genetic technologies. We're taking the human gene, let's say of insulin, sticking it into the bacteria as a piece of DNA, literally sticking into the bacteria DNA, And bacteria reading that particular code from a human being, reading that code and start producing, guess what? Human insulin. Does the bacteria has a use for human insulin? Not really, no. Bacteria like, well, I produce something I don't really use, so I'll secrete it. Just in case maybe it will help me to fend off someone. It's secreting the human insulin. We are collecting, purifying, sending to the people who need it. This is how now human insulin produced. It's not produced by humans. It's produced by tons of bacteria with the human gene, genetically modified organism. You go into the, let's say, a store and buying the tomatoes. Many of the tomatoes have a genes. It's a genetically modified organism. They have genes from a shrimp or flounder in them. Apparently, it makes those particular tomatoes or potatoes doesn't taste good for the. We don't really can tell. It's not like, oh, it's a fishy potato. No. We don't really tell the difference between those. Unless you have a severe allergic to the shellfish, you probably will not even notice that it has. But most of the tomatoes, as well as the potatoes in United States, have those particular genes to fend off some of the pests. A long time ago, well, kind of a long time ago, about 20 years ago, I was visiting Disney World, and in Epcot Center, there was a very interesting exhibit. There was a big kind of fish tank with two plants of potatoes growing. And one of the most common pests of the potatoes are Colorado beetle. The beetle and then the larvae of it basically feeds off the vegetative part, leaves of the potatoes. Potato plant, I should say. So now we have two plants in the same fish tank growing nicely. Well, there is a terrarium essentially. There is a layer of soil, the plants, everything is fine. And then they introduced the Colorado beetle. The regular potatoes was eaten to the sticks. The next potato, the genetically modified potato, had all the leaves, not a single beetle. Why? Beetle prefer the regular potatoes comparatively to genetically modified one. So going back to the evidence, the genetic code is universal. We don't know a single organism which is not following the rule of the genetic code. Remember, 4 bases, A, T, G, C, and they code all of the proteins we have in our body, as well as the RNA, amino acids, and of course, lipid bilayer. Later on, we'll talk about the bacteria, lipid bilayer, the cell membrane of all of the organisms, starting with bacteria, including us, the top of evolutionary chain. Speaking of which, are we top of the evolutionary chain? In some very often it says humans are the top of evolutionary chain. No, we are not. You can say, well, why not? We are the smartest one. Yes, but think about it. It's a tree, right? It's a biological tree. Different organisms, different branches. We are at this particular moment, we are at the tip of our branch. But there is a bunch of other branches. So it's not a pyramid. It splits up. It's a showing biological diversity. Anyway, biogeography. Very interesting thing. Two close related creatures. You probably heard about both of them. Llamas, right? Where you can find llamas? Well, cooking of anything changes stuff. There was a statement, apparently cooking fish changes the DNA. Whenever you cook something, you denature. If you ever tried, well, let's say most likely you tried, let's say, a sushi with salmon, right? Fresh, uncooked salmon, proteins. And then guess what? Whenever you try The cooked salmon, let's say grilled salmon, it tastes different, texture is different, even color is different. Why? Because whenever you apply heat or some of the chemicals, pickling, essentially cooking, we are changing the nature of the protein and the DNA. It starts to break up. Denature. Same thing, raw egg. Some of you might try the raw egg. All of you can visualize the raw egg. And then you're breaking it apart and you're frying the egg. Does the raw egg looks exactly the same as the cooked egg? No, it does not. Flat ironing of the hair, yes. Changing the protein structure, adding with the help of what? Of temperature, denaturing. That's why over ironing of your hair is not really good. It starts splitting up, you have to put conditioner, all that particular stuff. Now let's go back to the biogeography and llamas. Everybody knows about the llamas, right? Where you can find, if I decide to go and see the llama in under natural conditions, in nature, where I can find. Somewhere up high in the mountains of South America. South America, right? Down under, right there. Well, not in Australia, but we are North America, South America, Andes, right there. This is the llamas. This is where we can find. Now, there is another group of animals which most of you heard about it, known as the camels, right? Yes. Where I can find camels? Asia, mostly North Africa, that particular Mediterranean region, Central Asia, and then North Africa. Those two creatures, so they are one in Asia, let's call it Asia or Africa, whichever you prefer. Another in North America. Two different continents. There is like an ocean in between them, right? Yes, Pacific Ocean, the largest ocean in the world. Yet they are very close related. You can say, what in the world? As a matter of fact, we can create something which is known as the hybrid between camel and llama, known as a llama or kama. Yeah, we were able to do that. But how are they close related, yet they are on a different continents? Very simple. The center for the speciation of those particular species, of those particular groups, camels / llamas, was here in North America. You can say we don't have camels running around, no camels. I agree with you. And then we had something which known as the Ice Age. Ice Age started coming in. As a result, whenever the ice accumulating on land, the ocean levels drops down. So there was a land bridge between North America, Alaska, and the far east part of what's known as right now Russia. There was a land bridge. This is how ancestors of the camels ended up, guess where? In Asia. During the same time, humans from Asia came into not United States yet, there was no United States, into the America, North America first. Yay, and we have Native Americans, right? And they start moving down. Here, went further down south. So we have all of those Indians from South, Central, and North America, Native Americans coming in on one side, and then the camels, or pro-camels, it wasn't camels yet, they went down in Asia, and they start separating from the group which of the animals which went down south in South America, and they specialized. We ended up with the two different groups, one of them known as the camels, another known as the llamas. Geography, distribution of the organisms. We know how they distribute it. Same thing, how exactly humans, which are right now all over the world, but we can figure it out. That first we started in Africa, and then we tried to get into Europe. Neanderthals stopped us several times, and then eventually we got into Europe and Asia. From Asia, we went down into the Australia, and then we went up and we populated North America and South America. Yay, the humans rule the world now. Okay, so now issues, why it's still a theory. Why it's a theory? Why it's not a law? We have the evidence of the process. The problem is we don't know how exactly it works. Does not mean it's not exist. We don't know the mechanism behind the evolution, or we cannot explain all of the mechanisms or all of the things which generate that particular unfolding. It's very, very complex. In the corner right here, you can see the bat, which, you know, producing a very high pitch sound, essentially squeaky noises, and the noise travels, reflects, the bat can hear it back and then interpret, and if it's a prey, it will capture. So it does not really even have to see. It's using the echolocation. Now, what's the problem with the bat? That's the same thing happens with the dolphins. This is how the dolphins using echolocation to find the fish in the water. So now, according to a modern theory of evolution, the features, any kind of features like this one, cannot, well, the organs cannot evolve simultaneously. It have to be step by step. I evolved this, it's giving me an advantage. I evolved something else, giving me the advantage, and it start working in combination. However, if you'll think about it, let's say we have a bat, and the bat say, hey guys, I have a squeaky voice. Everybody's like, good for you. Because just the squeaky voice, and you have to have a very special voice box in order to produce that ultrasound, right? By itself, it do not give you the advantage as far as we can see. In order to have the advantage, you will have to have a special ears, which will be able to hear that particular squeaky voice. Most of us cannot hear bats, so specifically the high end of their voice, we cannot hear. Our ears are not sensitive enough. Bats' ears do. So at the same time, you have to evolve the voice box and the ears. So now we're looking at at least two organs evolving simultaneously. Now, it's not only the ears and the voice box. Now we have to have a brain, or the bat have to have a brain to interpret what it is hearing. Otherwise, there is no advantage. I'm making a squeaky noises and I can hear them. If it's not responding to the echolocation, if it's not interpreting the echolocation, there is no advantage to the bat whatsoever. In addition, it would have to develop the whole body, the wings. So we start looking at the evolution of several things pretty much at the same time. Otherwise, there is no advantage. Why or how this is happening, we cannot tell. It's the same thing as, let's say, I have a cell phone, right? Most of you have a cell phone as well. All of you probably have a cell phone. So now, cell phone. I know how it works, right? I'm pressing the button and I'm saying, hey, call to blah, blah. But do you know exactly what's happening inside of that particular cell phone whenever you're pressing the button? Do you even know how the touch screen works? Why it will be responding to my fingers? Why it will not be responding to, let's say, a metal object? So if you don't know how the cell phone exactly works, how it's sending the signal, how it's, well, it's encrypting the signal, how it's receiving the signal, and so on. Do you know exactly how it works? Yes, I know that some of the engineers probably do, but do you? I don't. I have a general idea, but in details, I don't know. It does not mean that the cell phone does not exist. Same thing with the evolution. We know it's happening. We cannot exactly tell why this is happening. We know that the some of the dinosaurs essentially evolved the wings, well, feathers first, then the wings, and then they start flying, and now we call them birds. That's, by the way, is the example of the evolution. Dinosaurs into the birds. Here we go. That's the evolution. The ancient hominids evolved into a modern humans. The bacteria become antibiotic resistant. That's a general, we can observe that. We know how it happens, but if we start talking about every single point of evolution, we cannot exactly explain how it happens. That's the reason why it's a law, why it's not a law, why it's a theory, even though Darwin came up about 150 years ago with that particular, 160 years ago now. We also cannot explain why some of the groups of animals are extremely diverse, even though similar looking creatures are very, there is like a handful of them. There is a group of creatures known as the silverfish. You probably heard about that. Most likely you've seen them. They're pesky kind of pets running around periodically in the house. It's kind of small. They are relatives of the insects. There is like 500 species of them. While the insects are in millions of species. I'm not talking about numbers. I'm talking about numbers of the species. Why at some point of time back 300, 400 millions of years ago, those particular insects got the upper hand comparatively to the silverfish. Sometimes we know that evolution is very, very slow. There is something which is known as the living fossils. Later on, we'll talk about horseshoe crab. Horseshoe crab is an odd-looking creature. You can find it actually pretty much all over the Atlantic coast. There is a population here in the Galveston Bay of odd-looking creatures. Are they super evolved? Not really, no. Are they very well adjusted to the environment? Well, the environment changed over a period of time because horseshoe crab did not change much, did not evolve essentially for the last 300 or so millions of years. You're looking at the fossils, you're looking at the modern, they're pretty much identical. Same thing with the scorpions. You're finding the perfectly preserved scorpion in the amber, and you basically can say which genus it belongs to. And that particular amber is like 100, 150 millions of years old. Are they most advanced? No, they're not. Are they most adjusted? Well, the climate change constantly on this particular planet. How they survived, why it's staying. Now, quick jumps. Remember we were talking about, I will go back to that example over and over again. 65 millions of years ago, something drastic happened on this particular planet. Probably a meteorite in the Gulf of Mexico, not far from the Progreso, Mexico, Chicxulub crater, right? Which wiped out not only dinosaurs, a lot of different creatures. What about mammals? Were mammals evolved at that time? Yes, mammals were already there. But would we see a larger mammals? No. While the dinosaurs, major groups of the dinosaurs were present on Earth, the most of the mammals stayed kind of small. Opossum-looking creatures or shrew-looking creatures, like a rat, kind of. Not the rats, no, not opossums, no. They were small, mostly nocturnals, etc., because the dinosaurs were hunting them down. Then something happened 65, 66 millions of years ago, mammals coming out, they're like, nobody's eating us, nobody's hunting us, let's take over the world. And yes, right now, 65 millions of years later, we live in the world of mammals. Within literally 10, 15 millions of years, which is from geological period of time, a relatively short time. In this particular case, 65 millions of years ago, 50 millions of years later, well, 15 millions of years later, so 50 millions of years ago, we already have major groups of the mammals established. We're talking about the future apes, the future elephants, the future whales, the future cats, the future whatever will become, cats and dogs and all other groups. I'll show it to you later on. So At some point of time, the evolution goes very slow, pretty much stops. And some cases, it goes really, really quick. And we cannot explain that. From the, well, we can say, well, 65 millions of years ago, but why the mammals didn't try to take over the world earlier than that? Kind of hard to tell. So population genetics, your favorite math, we already talked about the gene pool, the sum of all alleles. You don't really have to memorize the formulas. If the formulas will be on the test, I will give you those particular formulas. So genetic pool, sum of all the alleles, allele frequency, how often it shows up. We did it last time, so I'm not spending too much on that. Number of copies, so basically everything what we did in the lab. And then, of course, we have your favorite P plus Q and then 2PQ, well, P squared plus 2PQ plus Q squared equal 1. So here we're looking at the frequencies of the alleles, and then we're talking about the frequencies of the genotype. Genotype frequency, homozygous dominant, heterozygous, homozygous recessive. All right. So must equal to 100% or 1. Overall. So in this particular case, genotype versus allele frequencies, make sure that you know what they are. P is the allele frequency, P squared is the genotype frequency, or frequency of the individuals. Now, null models, already talked about that during the lab. It's a great theoretical reference point. We can tell that something is changing if we have that reference point. Same thing what we did in the lab. We had first 4 generations of the rabbits showing us exactly the same frequencies. That was our reference point. Whenever we'll start seeing the change, we can say, oh, it changed comparatively to our prediction, comparatively to our reference point. I'll give you the reference point of the moving. I don't move much, but according to the International Space Station, I'm going really, really fast. According to the sun, or observer on the sun, I'm moving even faster, and so on and so forth. So null models are reference. We already talked about the Hardy and Weinberg. They come up with a mathematical model, which is a pure theoretical, meaning none of the population in the entire world is actually in the equilibrium. But again, knowing what should be happening as soon as, let's say we have the, here in our class, we can calculate all of the frequencies for all of the alleles for us, for our population of bio2, right? And then we can look in the next generation and we'll see if those particular frequencies are exactly the same. If they're not, it means that in even a tiny little bitty population of bio2, we still have some sort of evolution happening. So once again, that principle, that genetic equilibrium, those numbers give us a reference point, pure theoretical. So here we have some of those particular things. Please remember, you will need to know 3 or 4. No new mutations, no natural selection. Large so there is do not change due to sampling. We're talking about migration, genetic drift, random mating. Like I said, there is 5 to 7 part. The population have to be huge. I mean huge, pretty much infinite. And again, for those ones are pretty much all goes no, and then there is a random mating, no preferences, all right? And that's in reality, make sure that you remember that in reality, no population meets those conditions. In reality, none of the population is in equilibrium. There will be question about that. I can guarantee, it's my promise to you, I guarantee you, unless I'll drop dead next tomorrow or something like that. There is always a possibility. But if I will be alive and well, I will put that particular question on the test. Short answer. So please make sure you know those. Fair warning. So if the frequencies are not in equilibrium, and there will be quite a few questions regarding that on the lab practical as well. there is an evolution taking place. So if there is a frequency not in equilibrium, we see some sort of evolution taking place. If they are in equilibrium, then there is no evolution. Make sense? Any questions, any problems on that? All right, moving on. So speciation, the process of formation of the new species. So as soon as the new species arise, we have the process of speciation being completed. Now let's take a look. Here we have a, well, the simplified tree of modern elephants. Here we have two of the elephants, right? We started with the relatively small creatures, kind of, well, they literally started as a rabbit size, and then they went into a pig size and then increased. So we have, and that happened about 30, 40 millions of years ago. So now we're looking at the different trees. All of those species, is that particular one alive? No, died off for whatever reason. Just the species has been eliminated. Stegodon died off. Mastodon died off. Here we have a really interesting creature, mammoth. All right. Most of you heard about the mammoth. You've probably seen the Ice Age as a cartoon. So in this particular case, why mammoth died? Very interesting thing. First of all, they died because of the global warming. Yay. Well, they were very well adapted to the cold environment. So they evolved during one of the ice ages, and then the ice started retracting. We start seeing the global warming. So they stayed in the tundra area, and this is where our ancestors start actively hunting them down. The last mammoth, as far as we understood, was hunted down by our ancestor about 5,000 years ago or so. So by the time some of our ancestors in ancient Egypt were building our first Egyptian pyramids with the help of extraterrestrials, of course, right? Yeah, I'm not going into that. No. They were building the first mastabas. Our ancestors were killing the last mammoth on that particular planet. We humans, Homo sapiens, are solely responsible, well, not solely, it's climate change and us, of killing that particular species. Humans are really good in elimination of the species. We'll talk about that a little bit more. As a matter of fact, all of you know that there is two types or two species of the elephants, the African, which is a little bit larger, and the Asian elephants. Asian elephants as a population, as a species, doing fairly well. It has been domesticated. You can see it throughout Southeast Asia, India, which is part of that particular continent. So it's doing fine. No problem. Smaller, usually smaller ear, fairly nice, kind of friendly behavior in most of the cases. All right. What about this guy? Well, I'll tell you this. Right now, there is African, of course, you'll find it in the plains of Africa. In the next 20 or so years, with the same rate of hunting down the African elephants, there will be no more African elephants in the nature, in the wild. Yes, they are in the zoos, and we have a quite good success of reproducing those particular animals. As a matter of fact, I think the newborn elephant in the Houston Zoo made it to its 6 or 7 years already. So yes, we have a great, very well established zoo program of the African elephants. But in the wild, we're killing them. So if you ever wanted to see the elephants, and it's a highly protective species, we're trying, but poaching, killing those particular large mammals. A couple of years ago, I think 2018, 17, somewhere like that, a very last white rhino as the example or representative of the species died off in Africa from the old age. That was the last one in a while. We killed it. So yeah, we are horrible. Well, to some extent, we as a species, I'm not saying you or me, we are as a species are pretty bad to that particular planet overall. So anyway, going back to the speciation, important factors. What kind of important factors in order for the group to split and eventually stay separate to create two new species? And in this particular case, genetic variability, very important. Genetic variance is extremely important in the process of evolution. And later on, I will link it, the genetic variability, to the sexual reproduction. So genetic variability. Now, isolating mechanisms. In this particular case, what happened with the Asian versus African elephant? They started with the same ancestor, right? So herd of prehistoric elephants. It wasn't the Asian, it wasn't the mammoth, it wasn't the African elephant yet. Prime elephants, essentially. Group of it went into Asia, Southeast Asia, south part of Asia, north part of Asia. Another stayed in Africa. Isolating mechanism. They geographically isolated themselves. So there was no much of the interaction between, let's say, mammoth and African elephant. So there is no mammoth African elephants hybrids running around. Same thing. The guy stays in Asia, the guy stays in Africa. There is quite a large distance between them to interbreed. As a result, over a period of time, and those particular lines shows period of time, they ended up being two close related but separate species. Then availability of new ecological niches. Some of the people like, what exactly does it mean? Role. What kind of role this particular species play in the environment? Ecological niche is essentially the ecological role of that species. Grazers. Grazers in the northern part, in the tundra essentially. Grazers in the tropical forests, grazers in the African savannas. There was available large grazers, okay, they start doing that. What if we have two species occupying the same ecological, or trying to occupy the same ecological niche? Two species at the same area. What's going to happen? They will compete against each other. And eventually one would have to switch to a different role or perish. This is what happens between us and Neanderthals. We were occupying the same ecological niche. We were playing the same role in the environment. So whenever we met them, we start literally waging a war with the Neanderthals. And Neanderthals, well, I'll talk about that a little bit more during the lab. So, but eventually what happened? We are here and Neanderthals nowhere to be found. We won. We killed them. We eliminate another species. Aha. And then, of course, it's all take time. And we're not talking about a year or two or 10 or 15. We're talking about thousands upon thousands of years. It takes a long time for a species, generally speaking, for a species to become a new species. That's why some of these people say, well, the evolution is wrong because we cannot observe formation of the new species. In bacteria, we kind of can, kind of. At least there will be a different varieties of the same type of bacteria. For the large ones, like we cannot find the, I don't know, European elephant. There is no such a thing. We cannot see it's evolving. Well, yeah, if we'll have a bunch of elephants running around Europe and we'll keep them there, eventually they will evolve in the European elephant, probably, or they perish. But in this particular case, it will take literally 10, 15, 20, 50,000 years before it will start separating from its ancestors. Kind of makes sense? So time is very important. So here we have genetic variability. See, all of those kittens, yes. oxytocin in your brain. Yes, very cute creatures. Yeah, so all of those are kittens from the same litter. So mother and father are the same. And well, those ones are most likely the females, because most of the time when you see the three colored cat, it's most likely a female, and that's probably a tomcat right there. So anyway, you can see that despite that they had the same father and mother, they look differently, and that's the genetic variability. Primary sources: mutations. Mutations are random changes. It's a mistakes in the copying of DNA over and over and over again. 99.999% of the mutations are either silent mutations, they are not affecting the organism, or they negative mutations. Yes, there is such a thing. Only 1 out of 10,000 mutations would be beneficial to that particular organism under those particular conditions. It does not mean it's benefit the organism overall, the fitness of it. It will beneficial in the process of reproduction. Then there is a gene flow, movement of the gene from one population to another. Well, think about it. The spreading of humans all over the world, here in Northern America or South America. For thousands of years, there was a specific genotype, Native Americans, and then Europeans start coming in. The people from Africa has been brought up. Asians start moving in. Now we have that melting pot. We have Latinos, we have Anglos, and so on and so forth. All of them, you can kind of trace the, in many cases, you can trace the genetic background where those people came from. But once again, quite often, it's right now kind of hard to tell where the person came from and where the ancestors came from. So genes, we are melting. That's the gene flow. Genetic drift. Already talked a little bit about that. Random event which changes the frequency. Let's say for some or another reason, three of those cats will die off. Let's say that as soon as you ended up with the 3 colors, you will have a lethal gene. They die off, they will not be able to reproduce, only black cats will be reproducing. Or vice versa, it doesn't really matter. So in this particular case, there is a random event. A human decide that those cats are not really good and he or she killed them or neutered them. Only that one they decide to use as the reproductive. So random event. The meteorite, which is randomly killed quite a few species, but some of the species were able to survive. So that's the change in frequency of the particular genes. That's the reason why there is no T-Rexes running around outside. We still have birds, quite a few of those species, but not much of the T-Rexes or velociraptors, right? Now, natural selection, already talked about that, when the environmental pressure resulting in the increase or decrease of a particular gene frequencies, our bunnies. We had the nature, we had Siberia, so the furry ones had the advantage. The frequency of the furry ones start increasing. If we would throw them into a Sahara desert, by the way, Sahara means what in Arabic? Sahara in Arabic means desert. So whenever we're saying Sahara desert, technically we're saying desert of the deserts, I guess. It's the largest desert in the world. So let's say we'll throw those bunnies in the Sahara desert. And in this particular case, the furry ones will be dying off from the heat shock and the furless one will be jumping around and reproducing. So we start seeing that particular gene frequency increase. All right. Now, sex. Haha. Yes, sexual reproduction. Whenever instead of one creature splitting into a clones, asexual reproduction, we have 2 merging up the genes. I have 2 boys with the same wife, so to speak, same, yes. But in this particular case, they look similar, but they are slightly different from each other. Well, look like. The personality is totally different. So this is the introduction of new gene combinations. within the population. If you have siblings, your brothers, your sisters, you all from the same parents, you will see them unless you are you have the identical twin. But identical twin is basically one zygote splitting into two. Other than that, you will be very similar looking, but there will be some specific varieties. So sex or sexual reproduction, and please remember that sexual reproduction, the main idea behind sexual reproduction in nature is increased genetic variability. A couple of years ago in my face-to-face class, we were talking about the same thing. I put on the final test, short answer, why sex important in nature, something like that. And I was looking for increased genetic variability, to improve the genetic variability. Anything to do with the genetic variability, I would count it as correct. Everything was great until I stumbled on one of those. I reread it. I'm like, huh, what? And then the student writing down, sex is important because it feels good. Well, for humans, yes. For many of other species, it does not. It's actually a fairly painful experience. So yeah, and I'm not looking at that. Genetic variability. Whenever we're talking about sex and biology, we're talking about increase of genetic varieties. That's pretty much all I'm asking. And again, I told you it might be on the test. I'm not saying it will be on the test, but yeah, since then I probably just kind of see if you are, yeah, haha, right now. Then I was like, what? Yeah. Anyway. Oh, speaking of the short answers, whenever you're writing the short answers, after you're done, before you're submitting the answer, please reread it just in case, because sometimes the person is getting very involved in whatever they're trying to say, and they're losing the logic pretty much completely, and it's become like a combination of different sentences which do not make sense whatsoever. So not saying you're going to do that, but it's a really good idea to reread what exactly you wrote. Also, regarding the short answers, if you leaving the blank on a short answer on the test, and you will have a short answers on the test, once again, I will tell you, well, I'm guarantee you that if you're leaving the blank, it's automatically 0. I cannot, well, you don't give me any chance whatsoever to give you the grade for anything whatsoever, because you didn't write anything. And nothing means nothing, that means 0. If you will write something, not literally something, I had those ones before too, but something what you think it might be. It might be totally wrong, but I will see where you're coming from. I can assign you a point for creativity, point to express yourself, or anything like that. If I'll laugh, sometimes it's kind of boring to sit and read the same thing over and over again in a different word, but says, and sometimes the student will say, I don't know what it is, but here it is, and here's a joke, biological and hopefully school appropriate. I had a student later on, we'll talk about the double reproduction in plants, double fertilization. And I had a student, again, last semester, semester before, writing down, I'm not really sure what double reproduction, double fertilization in plants is, but here's my take on it. And she is writing, like, you know, a brief summary of 50 Shades of Grey plant style. Was on a borderline of being almost inappropriate, but it was kind of quite an interesting read. I share it, well, I asked her if I can share it with my department head, and she's like, yeah, sure, yeah. I was able to award the creativity. I'm not here only for the knowledge. Make sure you will be able to express yourself. You know something. I have students like, I don't know anything. Well, you know something. Tell me, we talk about it. It might be right, it might be wrong. You never know until you try. All right, now, phenotypic variation. There is a qualitative and quantitative variation. Qualitative differs small incremental ways. Think about human height. We just don't have a very short people, a medium people, and the tall people. We have all of that difference from, I don't know, 3 feet all the way to probably 7 feet. Incremental differences, yes, of course, majority will be within the normal range, whatever it might be, but we still have that particular variety. All right? Quantitative. Individual exist in 2 or more discrete states. From the biological point of view, we have males and females. 2 discrete states. In most of the cases, you can tell this is a male, this is a female. Biologically speaking, I'm not talking about self-identification. Right now, there is like what, 114 different ways to identify yourself sexually. That's too many for me. I don't remember all of them. Yeah, I'm just periodically seeing that like 74, 114. Anyway, so I'm not talking about self-identification, whatever it is, again, not a sociology. From the biological point of view, male, female, the donor and acceptor, right? Recipient of the what? Of genetic information during the sexual reproduction, and so on. So the color for the peas in the Mendel's experiments, the blue, the purple one and the white, the short plants and the tall plants. Those ones are discrete states. Sometimes the tulips, the red and the white ones, whatever it might be. So in this particular case, qualitative, make sure if you have the example, you will be able to determine if it is a qualitative or quantitative. Quantity means that you have 2 or more discrete states. Now, phenotypic variation versus environmental. That's the important part. And in this particular case, not always the genotype or how the creature look like, the phenotype is reflection of the genotype. Very good example. Unfortunately, I haven't put it in the into the PowerPoint, but very good example is the plant known as a hydrangea. Hydrangea usually have a very nice flowers, and they typically pink or blue. So far, so good. So we're looking at the quantitative variation. We have a pink flowers, we have a blue flowers. But this is genetic, not real. It's actually environmental. What does it mean? You can take a plant with the blue flowers, pot it into the basic soil, and the same plant, the same flowers essentially, over a period of time within a week will change color from blue into kind of whitish greenish color, and then they will turn into a red one. So the acidity of the soil will tell what color it is. All right. So in this particular case, it just says we have a color of the flower, but the color will depend on the environment rather than genetic. Those particular colors of the kittens, of course, would be a genetic one. The color of my hair is the genetic one. But can I change it environmentally? Yes. If I'll spend all my time outside on the sun, my hair will get bleached. Environmental change. I will have a dirty blonde hair. Or I'll go to a I don't know, barber shop and bleach my hair, or change my hair into I don't know, red. That's environmental. It's not my genetic, right? All right, speciation and geography. Here's what will happen, and you will need to know 2 of those major speciation. Allopatric speciation. Allopatric speciation, allos means different. Patria, homeland, technically fatherland. Vaterland in German, right? Отчизна in Russian. Отечество, father. So in this particular case, allopatric speciation. Remember we were talking about the camels and the llamas. They started in North America, split, And now they evolved in the different homelands in Asia and the South America. Population are geographically isolated. Therefore, that's known as allopatric speciation. Now, sympatric speciation. Sym means together, patros means again, padre, father, fatherland. We usually saying homeland or motherland. In some of the European languages, they're talking about fatherland. So in this particular case, sympatric speciation, the population stays together in the same area. But for one or another reason, they stop interacting with each other. As a result, they're staying, and for example, there is, in the Galapagos Islands, there is two birds known as the boobies. There is a blue-foot booby and there is a red-foot booby. Technically, they are capable of interbreeding. Practically, they do not. Why not? One of them has, as the species name saying, blue feet, and another has a red feet. Whenever they are mating, whenever the male courting the female, what it does, it's standing, and then it shows its feet. Like, look how bright blue feet I have. And then the female like, oh, such a bright, if the red one will try to do like, hey, red, don't want it. So in this particular case, they're in the same area, but because of the specifics within the usually sexual preferences or sex, not sexual preferences per se, but sexual courtship, they are not really cross breeding with each other. And then there is a few other group of speciations, parapatric, near but usually at the end of the large population. Don't really have to worry about that. And then there is a peripatric. It's kind of combination of the allopatric and sympatric. We have a large population and one of them will be isolated by some sort of, like, for example, was a whole continent and then the piece broke off, Africa and Madagascar. And we have a peripatric speciation happening on that particular island. So here we have some of those. Two of those you need to memorize or know, the allopatric and sympatric. So here we have beetles initially started, and then over a period of time, because they had a geographic barrier, the green one stays in one side, blue stays in one other side of the population, and then now they do not mix and match. Here we start seeing a very large population, but somewhere at the edges, eventually what will end up is that the blue and the green will go into two different, close related, but different species. Now, pre-zygotic and post-zygotic isolating mechanism, that's a reproductive isolation. Whenever the newly formed species do not cross-pollinate, so to speak, do not mate with each other. Otherwise, they will merge back into the original species, or they will create a new one by merging. So, pre-zygotic, they prevent the sperm to find the egg. And then the post-zygotic, the sperm found the egg, the fertilization occur, now the zygote formation. What would happen to the hybrid? So reproductive isolating are not mutually exclusive. As a matter of fact, if all that fail, those ones quite often will kick a notch. But in this particular case, both of those mechanisms work together. So pre-mating versus post-mating. And then of course, there is always the possibility that both of those will fail. And then we might end up with interspecies hybrid. But often it's an infertile, and because it's an infertile, that's one of the post-zygotic mechanisms. So let's kind of take a look on some of the hybrids. Tiger, and a lion. We have a liger and a tigon. Depends on which one was male and which one was a female. That's a zebra and a horse. Remember we were talking about comma? Here we have a comma. As a matter of fact, we humans right now, we're playing gods essentially. There is over 40 different varieties, hybrids, interspecies hybrids between the big cats only. the panther and the tiger, the lion and the panther, and so on and so forth. So there is a jaguar with a panther. Naturally, they do not meet, but we are creating those particular hybrids. Ligands most of the time, ligers most of the time are infertile. And here we have the hybrid golar, I think. Yes, golar. It's a grizzly and a polar bear. So yes, that's a growler. Polar bear is the largest terrestrial predator, following by the grizzly. So we're creating the mix between those. So now let's kind of take a look on the pre-zygotic barrier. Geographic, lion and the tiger. Lions usually stays within Africa. Tigers typically in Asia, so they do not really cross unless humans putting them together. Ecological. Ecological means they are occupying different niches, so they do not cross-act with each other since they are playing different role in the environment. Some of the birds are, let's say, get the food from the ground, another from the canopy of the tropical forest, so they do not cross-act. Behavior. Many of the birds will have a very specific, or birds, insects, amphibians will have a very specific courtship rituals. And if that particular ritual is not going properly or not a correct song or anything like that, the female most likely will reject the male. Temporal or physiological. Temporal, they reproduce in a different times, tempo. So let's say in a Galveston Bay, we have 2 species of shrimp. If you ever tried shellfish here, a fresh shellfish, you most likely try. There is a white shrimp and a brown shrimp, close related species. But one of them are reproducing, spawning during the springtime, and another is about to spawn during the fall time. So they do not hybridize because they are spawning at the different times. Physiological, think about some sort of, well, let's say the Dutch hound, the sausage dog, right? And it's the same species, by the way. Dutch hound try to mate with a Great Dane. Yeah, and that will have a physiological problems. That also goes into a physical versus mechanical. And then the gametic isolation, essentially the sperm will not be able to recognize and fertilize the egg. Post-zygotic, hybrid viability. Hybrid is not viable. As soon as the hybrid happens, it starts developing and then dies off. Hybrid infertility. The hybrid will become infertile. It will go through the term, will be born, but it will not be able to reproduce on its own. Great example for hybrid infertility is the horse, which is a different species from a donkey. They can interact, they can interbreed, and they'll produce mule or hinnies. Those ones are infertile. They cannot, mules cannot reproduce with the mules, cannot reproduce with the horses, cannot reproduce with the donkeys. They're infertile. Hybrid breakdown. Hybrid breakdown is usually the first generation of the hybrids viable, and the second one dies off or infertile. And then the polyploidy, mostly in plants, doubling, tripling, quadrupling of number of the chromosomes. As a result, it will create a very strange hybrids. Most of the cultural plants, the strawberries, most of the berries, etc., they are polyploid, doubling, quadrupling the amount of chromosomes. All right, gradualism versus punctuated equilibrium. Gradualism, the new species, this is 2 models of the speciation. The changes are occurring relatively slow. As a result, species are going or evolving relatively slow. And then the punctuated equilibrium. Some sort of event happens. As a result, the species evolved relatively fast. We talk about the extinction event 65 million, 66 million of years ago, and then we start seeing punctuated equilibrium for mammals. Before that, we were evolving relatively slow. So both views have a merit, and we can see that particular thing, as you can see, from the one large population, some of the creatures ended up on a higher altitude, another stayed on the foothills of the mountain. Now, eventually, we'll see very slowly two different species. In this particular case, we had the phenotypic change. Now, let's say ice age come up. Ice age come up, so that particular population have to decrease the amount of darkness in their hair. And here we're looking at the global warming. So now we're looking at the creatures which start getting more darker or something like that. So here we have the final words, the absence of evidence. That's basically words or a quote from Carl Sagan, one of my favorite astrophysicists. The absence of evidence is not the evidence of the absence. So once again, not trying to put the science versus religion or anything like that. As a matter of fact, in some cases right now, there is a whole trend going, try to put whatever the science says and match it up to whatever the Bible is saying. Like, remember one of the first part of the Genesis where it says that the God created, well, separated light from darkness. And this is what some of the scientists believe, that this is what is a description of Big Bang. Big Bang is basically a separation of what? Energy and the matter. Energy is some sort of light, and the matter is the dark part of that. Oh, there is a huge interpretation. So once again, keep your mind open. That's a general statement for this end of the lecture. All right, well, we are done for today with the lecture. And let's kind of